Hey y'all, this is Sam and you're listening to Living Country in the City, episode 51.
Y'all ready for your dose of flyover state spirit? Straight from the concrete jungle? Well, put down your latte and pull on your boots. It's time for Living Country in the City.
Alright y'all, welcome to episode 51 of Living Country in the City. Y'all may be wondering what all this noise is in the background. Well, I've got a slightly different episode in store for y'all. I am actually in the car on the way back from my very first Arizona muley hunt, and I'm going to do a little bit of a solo episode for y'all. Hopefully y'all will find this interesting, find it helpful. I'm going to talk about some of the stuff I learned and experienced on my hunt. A lot of you experienced hunters out there may find this completely obvious, and a lot of you may find it useful. I don't know. Maybe it's new information for you new guys, or maybe it's good reminders for people that have done it for a while. But we'll see where my solo ramblings will take us. Well, like I said, just got back from a weekend trip to Arizona. Drove out on Friday night, Saturday morning, and am heading back right now. It is Sunday evening, and I picked up an over-the-counter deer tag for Arizona for late-season archery. If you aren't aware of this tag, it's one of the best deals you can get. You can hunt some really primo units. And you can bow hunt deer during the rut. So you can get 3 really good seasons of hunting in. You can chase mule deer and coos deer during the rut, and you can also chase them when they're in velvet in August. So it's definitely a tag worth picking up, especially if you're putting in for any other points in Arizona, since you've already had to pick up your Arizona hunting license. You might as well get some more hunting in, especially because this is a time when there's not really a lot else to chase when it comes to Western hunting. I mean, you can get some pig in, you can do some predator hunting. There's not a ton still available at this time. So really awesome opportunity that not a lot of people seem to fully know about or be aware of. So I'd highly recommend checking it out. Now, these over-the-counter tags you are not able to buy online. This was something I learned after pulling my hair out, trying to figure out where to buy them online. Not really sure why you can't buy them online, but you have to head to Arizona, head to a Walmart, a Big Five, anywhere that sells tags, and they should be able to hook you up. Unless you're me, and you're driving in later than you expected. So, because I'm not able to take any additional time off of work, I basically had a plan. I was going to take half the day on Friday, leave the office early, and then head into Arizona, hopefully get there before 10 o'clock, pick up a tag, and head to my site. Well, per usual, everything was rushed. I was running behind. I wasn't able to get out of the office in time. I had to finish up some online scouting that I'd done. I had marked a bunch of points, but I hadn't selected a site yet, so I had to finish that. I had to get a podcast posted for my Patreon supporters, and which, by the way, if you would like to see me release more content and want to help out with Living Country in the City, make sure you check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/livingcountryinthecity, or you can find info about that on my support page at livingcountryinthecity.com/support. But so I had to get a podcast released early for my Patreon supporters, so that had to go up Friday night, and I just had long story short, I had a ton to do and was not able to get out until really late. And so at that point, I figured I might as well sleep for a few hours and not die on the drive out. So I get into Arizona. I'd say around 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. Head into the Walmart. They're open 24 hours. Fish and Game said anyone in a Walmart should be able to help you. There's no time limit on when they sell tags. Well, go into the Walmart, and the manager there made it very clear that she didn't like me and that I was being a complete nuisance by existing in that store at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. So I wasn't sure what I was going to do. She pretty much told me no. Nobody here knows how to do it. Yeah, I'm sure one of the managers does, but no one here is trained on it, and blah, blah, blah. You have to come back later. Well, fortunately, there's 3 Walmarts in Yuma, Arizona, and the second Walmart I went to had a very friendly manager who hooked me up with my tag and also explained to me that anybody in management absolutely knows how to do that, and that the lady probably was just not wanting to because it's a little bit time-consuming if you haven't done it in a while. But so, little word of advice. If you are going to be picking up your tags when you're driving into Arizona, wherever you happen to be picking up those tags, make sure you call them beforehand. Make sure you are sure that where you're going, one, will be open. Fortunately, Walmarts are open 24 hours, but also make sure that they will have someone on staff available to purchase tags. So because of all this, I ended up being an hour later getting into my hunting spot than I wanted to, which was I was already an hour later than I'd planned on getting there because in my haste to plan the trip and get out here, I didn't account for the time change. So I got to my spot just after Civil Dawn, not too long before sunrise. And I'm pulling up to the check station here. All right, sweet. They're waving me through the Arizona-California border check station. So, anyways, I'm just pulling up to my spot just a little bit before full sunrise. There's already plenty of light. I'm already super irritated with myself. So, throw on my hunting boots. I make sure my pack's all nice and tight. I get all my gear, throw it on my back, and I start to walk out to where I'm going to glass for the rest of the day. Well, fortunately, I realized this right then and not when I got to where I wanted to glass and got my camp all set up, but I didn't have my release on me. So, hopped in the car, started digging around for my release, only to realize that apparently I didn't pack it. I always keep my quiver in my car, and I have a spare release in my quiver. Well, in the hustle and bustle of unpacking and from Christmas and repacking for this trip, I must have pulled my quiver out of the car as well. So no quiver. So I'd driven 5-6 hours, got to my spot, no release, which is pretty important for bow hunting, just to say the least. And I had made a list before, anyone says anything. I had made a list, and I checked over it, but I wasn't checking things off as I put them in the car. I had everything laid out, and typically when I have my list of stuff that I'm packing, when I put it in the car, that's when I check it off the list. Well, this time around, I was checking off the list when I was laying stuff out, and then rushed to throw everything in the car, didn't bring my release. Had a few moments when I was debating whether or not to just turn this into a scouting trip for next week or what I was going to do. So I looked at the time, realized that if I started tromping to my glassing spot, I was probably going to blow out any deer anyway. If I was running through there right when they would be moving around. So decided I would drive back into Yuma and went and dropped $50 on a new True Fire release. So now I have 2 backup releases. and have to go find what the heck I did with my main release. So suffice to say, lists are very important, but checking them off and at the right time and making sure you're fully packed is more importanter. Well, finally get up to my glassing spot. I'm up there probably about between noon and 1 o'clock. I'm up at my glassing spot. Find a good spot. Have to side hill on some super uneven footing and get to my glassing spot. Sit down for the rest of the day and glass. On the way in, actually, I saw a jackrabbit. That's about the only sign of life I saw all day. That and some tracks, but I saw absolutely nothing all day. Glassed into the evening and not hide nor hair of anything. Now, I learned a few things while I was doing this. One is that I need higher power binoculars for glassing in the desert. All of my gear that I picked up specifically for my elk hunt. That elk hunt still is my passion. That's what I'm absolutely obsessed with. So I planned all my gear for that hunt. Picked up the nicest glass that I could afford, a pair of Vortex Diamondback 10x42s, which are great if you're, cruising through thick timber and, the furthest you're probably going to see is maybe, 100, 200 yards across a meadow. Well, those 10x42s really are not sufficient. I think we've talked about this on prior podcasts before. Those are really not sufficient when you're glassing miles from a knob out in the middle of the desert. I mean, my prime spots, I'd say, that I was glassing were only about a mile and a half away. But when you're up that high, why not glass further out as well? And the ability to pick out those details, especially when you're looking for those, a flick of a tail, whatever that may be, the ability to pick out those details is really important. And I don't know if there was anything out there that I missed, obviously, but having that ability is just so important. And I know there's a lot of detail that I wasn't seeing. Whether that detail included deer sign, no idea. So there was that. I've also realized when you're out in the desert like that and you're just glassing miles away and across scrub and brush and cactus and rocks, you really have no solid sense of scale. It is incredibly difficult to judge scale unless you have some point of reference. So the entirety of the first day, I'm glassing, and I've got my mind and my eyes kind of, I guess for lack of a better term, calibrated to look for qualities or features of deer that are at a certain size. Well, the issue with that is I was expecting them to be way too big. Fortunately, I had perspective at 2 points. I had a good buddy of mine, Josh Deards from, and I apologize, Josh, if I'm totally butchering your last name right now. I realized I've never actually pronounced it. But a good buddy of mine, Josh Deards from Hunt 3A, he was out chasing muleys, and he texted me some pictures through his phone scope, and that kind of gave me a good reference of, when you're glassing 2 miles away, those deer are going to look teeny, but you don't realize that because you're looking at the scrub brush, and you can't tell if that bush is a 10, 15-foot high bush or a 2-foot high bush half of the time. Everything just becomes so super vague as far as scale. But fortunately, he texted me a picture, and that helped a little bit on that first day. Second day, I caught some hikers a couple miles off, and I saw them with their dog, and that gave me a really good sense of scale. it amazed me how small they were against the landscape and against the landscape features. So that's something new now that I'm going to be able to apply to next weekend when I head back out here. I'm not sure if I already said this or not. I can't really get the time off of work, so I drive out Friday afternoons, evenings, and drive back Sundays. But so fortunately, that's information that I can really put to use next week when I come back. And next week, I'm super excited. I'm going to be hunting with Josh. He's bringing out some, I think, 12 and 15 power binoculars for us to use. So hopefully we can really get deep into some of those draws and washes and whatnot, and maybe do a little bit more traveling up and down and see if we can glass something up and then stock in on it, or at least glass up some prime territory that'll be worth looking into further. But really, a good tip, something to remember is as you're coming in, as you're going to your glassing spot, take note of some of the landscape features, whether it's a few cactuses, a few specific unique-looking bushes. Take note of how tall they are, how wide they are, whatever that is. Then when you're up to your glassing spot, look back at those, measure it on Onyx or Google Earth or whatever. Take note of the distance from that feature to your glassing point, and then take note of how big or small that looks. And picture a mule deer in front of it, picture a person in front of it, and really calibrate your eyes so you can get a sense of scale as you're looking further out. So you see, obviously not every cactus is going to be the same height, but generally it'll give you a better idea of what size those features of deer that you're looking for are going to be. So finished up for the evening. Found a relatively flat spot on my glassing knob where I could set up my tent. Normally I've been running a Kafaru Sawtooth, which I absolutely love. It's just one of the greatest tents in the world, in my opinion. But this trip, I wanted to try something lighter. The weather the entire time was pretty much in the 60s and 70s during the day, and maybe down to the high 40s, mid-50s in the evening. So it was just super pleasant, balmy weather the entire time. Didn't really expect any rain or any heavy weather, maybe some sprinkles, but nothing really heavy. So I wanted to try out a lighter option. Figured this was a prime trip to try out a tarp tent. I had picked up a Slumberjack tarp tent from Camo Fire for $60. I knew I was getting it discounted, but wasn't expecting a ton out of my $60 tarp tent, but I really liked it. I had a lot of different options to set it up. Used my trekking poles for supports in the tent. It comes with tie downs. The ground there was entirely too rocky for me to be able to put in stakes. But fortunately, I was able to grab some really large rocks. I took the line that came with the tarp tent, strung it out from each of the corners and the sides, attached them to some really big rocks, ran those trekking poles to hold it up, and it worked great. I definitely want to practice setting that up so I can do it a lot quicker and cleaner. It was pretty windy, though, and it held up. I was really surprised how well it held up. I really, had no real complaints about it other than the fact that I just didn't know how to practice quite enough setting it up. So for these warmer hunts, I definitely recommend trying out a tarp tent. It's a really great lightweight option. Super easy to just drop camp wherever you are. A lot quicker of a setup. Even when I didn't know really what I was doing with it, it was still a lot quicker of a setup than a larger tent. So definitely worth looking at. But yeah, so the next day, got up, glassed all through the morning, was up before the sun, out to my glassing point, and I'd say glassed a good 6 hours up there. Nah, maybe a little bit less than that. I was up at 6, probably got out there 7:30, something like that, so about 4.5, 5 hours, somewhere in there. Really dug into every detail I could that I could pick up with my binoculars, but honestly, I don't know if they just weren't there or if I just wasn't seeing them. But yeah, I was at about noon. I was starting to wonder. I was debating if I wanted to stick it out and just really keep digging into those details and seeing if I could glass anything up. But I was getting a little bit antsy, and I had another buddy hit me up on Instagram and mentioned that he had found some water in a few different spots and shot me the location. It was maybe about 2-3 miles south of me, not very far at all. So I hiked back to the car, hopped in, drove as far as I could, hiked in to see if I could find that water. And it was pretty dry, but I got a couple miles back, got not too far from there, and there was definitely water. There was a good amount. It looked nasty as hell. Was very grown over. And I noticed plenty of sign of what looked like jackrabbit. Same thing, I've been seeing everywhere. This looked a lot more fresh. So didn't see any deer tracks. There was no deer scat whatsoever. So it wasn't overwhelmingly promising there. And strangely enough, I don't know what was going on with it, but I was just noticing, I couldn't tell quite what it was, but it looked like something was growing on top of the water. I went and looked to take a closer look, and it was bees. It was the weirdest thing I'd ever seen. Well, maybe not the weirdest, but it was up there. There was just hundreds and hundreds of dead bees just floating on top of the water. And, I mean, a significant amount, like enough for me to take notice. There was maybe 2 or 3 bees still flying around, but there was hundreds of them across the top of the water. They weren't like waterlogged and floating or whatever. They were just, it looked like they had kind of landed on top of the water or something and then just died. They were still on top of the skin of the water. It was just, I don't know, it was super bizarre. I don't know what caused it. I don't know if there's something in the water that was toxic to them, but suffice to say, it was just really freaking weird, man. Well, past that water trough, I saw what looked like could be some game trails, and it just looked pretty interesting going past that. So I hiked up past the water trough, or the water catchment, or I don't even know what it was, if it was man-made or natural. It was kind of hard to tell because there's some man-made structures around it, but it looked like the little pool itself may have been natural and people just built stuff up around it. But either way, I walked up past that. There's some interesting looking spots, and all of a sudden, before I realized it, I had gone on a 2-mile hike, went way up past that little pool, and kind of went up, down, and around and found this other wash that looked like it led all the way out to the kind of the road where I'd driven in, and then I could come back around to my car if I wanted to. So I'm like, well, might as well take a different way out than I took in, see if I can see anything. Once again, didn't stir up so much as a jackrabbit or a ground squirrel that I could see. Just really, once again, no sign of anything. I may have seen some coyote scat, but that was old as hell, too. There just wasn't anything moving except for the occasional bird. So, hiking down this wash, assuming that's the right term for it, it looks like an old riverbed. Water definitely flowed down there. I'm really bad. One of these days, I'm going to do a podcast with someone on hunting and hiking and camping terms. I know most of them, but to be honest, I talk about a wash or a draw. I'm not 100% sure what that is. So Just admitting my own failures here. Anyway, so long story short, I'm following this spot where water obviously used to flow. On my way out, almost end up getting stuck. Started heading down some pretty steep, broken up terrain, and was kind of walking, sliding, scrambling down this hill, and for the life of me, wasn't totally sure how I would be getting back up. With all that weight, I mean, I wasn't carrying a ton of weight. I left a good portion of my gear back in the car, but with holding my bow and the weight I had, I'm not sure I would have been able to scramble back up that, at least not very easily, and at least not without some scraped up shins and arms. But so I continued down, and I end up basically cliffing out. I looked down, and I would love to see that spot with water flowing, because there would have been a gorgeous waterfall coming down there. It was probably about 20 feet down. Definitely a little bit more than I wanted to try. And there's no way I could have really hung the way the edge was. I couldn't have really hung off the edge of it. So was a little bit worried for a minute there. Managed to find a second way out and around and down. But, another word from the wise is learn from my mistake, and watch what you commit yourself to, especially if you're out there solo. I wasn't worried that I was going to get hurt or honestly worried that I was going to be trapped or whatever. But it would not have been pleasant getting out of there. And I'm glad I found an easier way out, because I unwisely committed myself to a little trip down that draw or wash or whatever the heck, because I obviously don't know what the heck either of those are. Long story short, get back to the car, head on out. It's getting a little bit late in the day. And what I've driven by, haven't really seen any promising spots, any promising sign. So I had a few other water catchments marked on my map and decided, well, with the remainder of my time, I'll go check these out. I'll do a little bit of scouting, and we'll see what I can see for next week. So proceeded to check out the rest of these water catchments, drive around a bit. Really saw some good sign. Didn't see a lot of scat around them, but tons and tons of different tracks all around this water. You can tell just about everything comes there to drink. It's so dry that options for wildlife to drink are super limited. And the one thing that bums me out is I wish I'd thought to bring my my game cameras with me. If I'm coming back week after week, it would be perfect if I had those game cameras, set them up on a few of those watering holes, and come back next week to see what's actually showing up there. Could even leave it there for the next couple of weeks if I don't end up tagging out, and just see what kind of wildlife is making its way through there, whether it's javelina or coos, mule deer, or just a lot of friggin' jackrabbits. So, learned a lot. I guess to summarize, the biggest things I learned, don't forget your frickin' release if you're bow hunting. That's number one. Otherwise, you're going to have to do a lot of driving. When you're doing travel hunts and you're trying to get there by a certain time, make sure you account for time changes. I know that may sound obvious, but, when you're in a hurry and planning, it's not something you always think about. Make sure you call ahead if you're having to buy a tag in person. Make sure you call ahead to make sure the place you're going to buy the tag is open and has staff available that are able to issue a tag. Make sure your gear is suited to what you want to do. Obviously, you can't always have everything, and so sometimes you'll just have to make do with what you have. I bought the best binoculars that I could afford, and had to deal with having 10x42s on my trip. But in general, if you're able to bring along some 12 bys or some 15 bys, you'll have a lot better of a time picking out those details and those deer features than you will with 10 bys when you're glassing miles and miles away through the desert. Always leave yourself a way out when you're hiking. Don't get yourself stuck into sticky situations. Calibrate your mind and your eyes for the details you're looking for. Check a terrain feature. Make sure you know how far away it is and how big it is, or how wide, how tall, whatever. That way you have a sense of scale when you're glassing 3 miles off and you can't tell how big a cactus or a bush is. You'll have a much better gauge, and you can really put that against the size of an animal you should be looking for, the details you should be looking for. Well, hope you all found something interesting in this. Not the most exciting episode, just more of me rambling, but hopefully there was some tidbits in there. Hopefully y'all enjoyed hearing about this first week, and hopefully I will be seeing some mule deer, some coos deer next weekend. But I'm going to close this one off. I'm sure you guys are sick of listening to me at this point. So check out the show notes page. That'll be at livingcountryinthecity.com/51 for episode 51. Not going to be too much on there, considering I'm just talking to myself, but make sure y'all check those out. And in the meantime, keep it country, y'all.
Thank y'all for listening to Living Country in the City. Get show notes and check out the blog, product reviews, events, and more at livingcountryinthecity.com.